to learn through each other. There's a lot to learn just to help our economy, because if you're going to be the generation that is eventually going to take over the economy or be part of it, you need to figure out how to shape it. This is Take Note. In studios joining me, because the event is actually this morning, from UNFPA, I have Christine Nario. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I have Cedric Mohewa, also from UNFPA.
Good morning.
Good morning. We have youth contribution to national development, and we were actually sharing a thing before this that this is the majority of our population.
Yes.
You can't run away from it. In fact, the population is going younger than it is going older.
Very youthful.
Very youthful, which should be a good thing, actually.
Yes.
It's a good thing that our population is young. So today the dialogue is generation for generation.
Yes.
Maybe, Christine, you can help me explain to those watching what we mean when we say generation for generation.
We're looking at three groups right now. So there's what we call the elderly, the people who are 65, 70 years and above, but there's also the middle age, but there's the youth. And you know, the definition of a youth, I think, is 30 years and below.
Yes.
And all these groups need to engage with each other. So it's generation, the elderly, those that are 70 plus, those that are middle age, and those that are youthful. How are we engaging? How are we passing on the nuggets from each of the generations to each other?
Do you believe there's something to learn from the other way around, the younger to the older?
Oh, definitely.
Because someone told me there's nothing. The older have to teach the young.
Nothing. I'm a mother of two young women, and they're teaching me all the time. Joy and Ruth are teaching me all the time.
That's fantastic.
And the other year, I got an operation with my leg, and I couldn't go up the steps at UNFPA. So I was put in this office where there are all youth around me. And oh my, every day I was learning things like from how to handle my computer and the IT. I thought I knew, and I thought I knew what to do with it. But I was learning every day, and to learning the new joints in town. And I'd go back home and tell Ruth and Joe, oh, I know this new joint.
I know this and that.
And said, Mommy, where did you get that?
You're hanging with people they can relate to. That's important. So, Cedric, if we're going to have a discussion around youth contribution to national development, or the money. First of all, the way Christine has broken it down, we have those who created jobs, those who employed us, those who are employed. But then someone has said that now even that group, the youth, are creating their own jobs. They're not waiting around for somebody to have an industry and call them to work, or for them to graduate years later and then have a job. Before we get into the economy side of it, is it just about business, employment? What about life skills? Is that very necessary in this conversation of generation to generation?
I'll start from the point of saying that young people must shape their future. And what that means is that at all times we always have a transition between the old, the middle,
and the young.
Now, when you go back to the African traditional society, even post-independence, we had these conversations around fireplaces, and we were listening from the elders. Part of that was taking instructions, but part of that was telling us on life lessons. But what you have today is a world of social media. What it means is that what you assumed as fireplace conversations
happening differently.
now happens differently.
Yes.
So
even this is a conversation, by the way.
Exactly. It happens every day. So for the older generation, it's for them to learn that for the life skills to be passed on, certain media must be adapted, certain media must be looked at and appreciated and well controlled, just like they controlled us in the African Traditional Society or in our local culture family, just like they controlled us. So we sort of need to have that as well, whether it's social media, whether it's a conversation like this, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a family at home. The life skill must be passed on through that form of process, because quite obviously we see that the older generation, much as we the younger take ourselves to have some sort of
we know too much.
We know too much.
We know everything.
But back in our minds, we also appreciate that you know the older people know so much.
Yes.
And much as we also know so much, we admire the way they pass on certain things, and that's what we need to take away. That's how life skills must be passed on through that sort of process.
Let me be honest. I'm getting out of the youth phase, to be honest, which is okay. I'm 30 now, but sometimes I look at my life, whether it's career, whether it's personal life, and I'm thinking, did the older people already know what I'm going through? How did they not tell me? You know what I mean? Sometimes you're going through a tough moment. I'm just saying, how did they not teach me how to deal with pressure?
I know.
In the workplace.
Yes.
How did they not tell me how to be patient with
Yes.
people?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, it's the little things
Yes.
sometimes. But I also don't understand how we can have a generation for generation conversation if, like you've said, things have changed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Trends have changed.
Yeah.
The way we communicate has changed.
Yes.
I don't need to go and sit with you at home as my uncle or my father and have a conversation. If you don't text me or WhatsApp me in this generation, you won't get me.
Yes.
Somehow.
So how are we going to have this generation for generation conversation if a lot has changed?
Yeah.
I mean, are you telling me that now even the older generation needs to be equipped
Yes.
with different communication tools?
Very true. We come from different generations, so each generation needs to have, I think, what Stephen Covey has called a paradigm shift. Things used to be done those days, like my daughters tell me, Mom, that's the music of your
days.
That's the communication style of your days. So can you come down to our days? Can you come down to where we are at now?
Which is not easy.
Which is not easy, but I've had to think through it. I want my girls to be brought up and I want them to be successful and have these skills and all these experience over the years. I need to pass it on. So I've had to adapt. We have a family WhatsApp group.
Okay,
Now,
that's one way of adapting.
get it down to
Yes.
communities. You've got to sit with them and you've got to find ways to attract them. If you go and just call them for a meeting, they'll be in the community walking around and doing their stuff.
That's true.
But when you bring some music, hey, they come.
We have a
you've got to
community
think-
party. They'll show up.
You've got to think through and get down to their perspective also. But it works the other way too. You know, they've got to learn, so these middle age and elderly have something to say to us. So even for the youth, they have to have a paradigm shift and say, wow.
They have to figure out how to communicate
Yes.
to the older generation as well.
So it's
Yes.
about the perspectives and getting us all to have the paradigm shift. So nurturing a paradigm shift. And that's what UNFPA is doing with the generation to
The generation
generation.
conversation.
Can we have a paradigm shift where we all see the need to communicate and get down to the level of each other? Whichever way, whichever generation.
Yeah, I like that. You know, we've started with the family level.
Yes.
We've talked about community level.
Yes.
And eventually you come to the country and, as we said, global. But young people, I mean, I know in America when they were going for the state votes, they were saying that young people need to come out and vote because there's a big number of young people and they're not bothered. They say, me, go cast a vote. It happens here as well. When we have elections, young people in a line. Why? I'd rather be sleeping. You understand? And yet, to be honest, these decisions are being made that, to be honest, affecting them more than they are affecting the older generation. So how are we getting young people to, for example, be involved in things like that? Because if generation for generation, the dialogue is talking about policy, making policies to help these young people, they need to be involved in big decisions like that.
Exactly.
Who's my leader? For example, my mother kept saying, you need to know the chairman, you need to know this and that. I'm like, those low-level leaders, why? And yet, to be honest, it starts there.
Yes.
If I don't know my chairman, I want to know my MP, I want, you know, it goes to every level. But how are we getting people involved, young people especially, involved in such conversations?
You know, a dialogue like this, the Generation for Generation dialogue, is part of the demonstration of how this can be done. But that put aside, the other thing is that when we were growing up, we never knew that an LC chairperson is very important.
They were important to our parents.
Yeah, they were important to our parents.
Not to us.
They were not important to us. But when you look back, right now, for me as a person, I see that they were important right from that point. But it's just that maybe my mother or the people around me did not explain that sort of importance very well.
Okay.
So even with the people who hold the direction of the discourse, of the regulation, of the policies and everything, they need to go out and have an extra mile of explaining what it means, why it's very important for you to know the LC1, why it's very important for you to go and vote.
Yes.
And we all realize that, yes, they've asked us to vote. Even when we've not voted, we've felt like some things have not been right.
Yes.
But it's a process. So we need to accept it. It takes time, 60 years, 20 years, whatever that time takes. And you talked about patience. A very important aspect of this sort of discussions, and much as we always show that, you know, we're in a rush, you know, but that sort of rush must come down. But Christine made a point on listening to the younger generation as older people. And she also touched a little bit on saying it works the other way around.
Yes.
But for me, I feel that it's more important actually for the young people to listen more to the older generation, to the older generation than the old listening to us, because the shaping of the future that I talked about earlier, we are not going to change much in terms of the culture and the drive and the direction that the country is taking. We'll probably have the same culture. We'll probably have not the same culture, but a relatively similar culture 50 years down the road. And the people who are shaping it is the older generation. So we must listen and understand the reasons why certain things happen that way. So that even when we, at a time, 50 years, I'm 70 years, and I have the decision and the power to change something, I understand the context within which it was changed, and now I have all the evidence to move to that sort of direction. Yeah.
I think in just this conversation, we've explained what generation for generation.
Yeah, correct.
To be honest, I was listening to you, and I said he couldn't have said it better.
Yes.
Because you're saying that, okay, you want me to vote. Why? Because you never explained to me, just
Why?
at a family level, you never told me why the chairman is important.
Yes.
So I thought he was just a friend to the family.
Yes.
Yet if at the moment you had said, this is his use in community, this is why. And I think even the leaders are trying nowadays to speak to young people and say, this is my role. As your MP, this is why I am here to inform this. I thought before we talk about probably one of the biggest scourges for young people, which is unemployment, there's a small clip we have to play for you here, which is the UN Chief Antonio Guterres having a comment here on pretty much what we're talking about, if I can have that.
The frustration generated in young people that have no hope in the future is a major source of insecurity in today's world. And it is essential that when governments plan their economic activities, when the international community develop forms of cooperation, it is essential to put youth employment, youth skills in the center of all priorities, in the center of all projects. And unfortunately, this sometimes tends to be forgotten. And one way to avoid these to be forgotten is to bet strongly on the empowerment of young people. Believing that we are facing enormous challenges, believing that the best hope for those challenges is in the new generations, we need to make sure that we are able to strongly invest in those new generations.
Yes, UN Chief Antonio Guterres is saying that we need to bet on things like their skills and put that at, the employment, put that at the center of our discussions, because if they're empowered, if they're skilled, then you're okay. You actually don't need to babysit the generation.
You don't.
Right?
You don't.
Yes. Your thoughts
You don't.
on that?
So that is critical. The education system has to prepare them for what is coming on the job market. And you hear a lot from what has been summarized in the ILO reports from our labor market. The market is saying you are producing for us people that are not meeting the skill sets and
Absolutely.
the competences that we need. So the education system, I think, has
Needs
to catch
to
up
change, yeah.
with the market. And there's got to be a dialogue and say, what is it that we are producing? Is it relevant? So if it's not relevant, how do you quickly skill them? So one of the things that to me is critical is if you have this person going out there to be employed and they can't even effectively communicate they can't communicate, not even write their CV or write anything. They can't even talk. They can't be on be interviewed by a panel.
Somebody has a
and speak
first-class
out.
degree and still
they
can't do the
talk,
job.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you know. So effective communication is key, and public speaking skills must be given to our students right from, you know, whatever age it is. I belong to Toastmasters, and that's part of, it's a global community that is an educational on effective communication. I was reading a book, The Jewish Phenomena, and they're saying there are things they do with their kids right from childhood and debate at home. But you know, in our culture, the child should not talk back.
Yeah.
But they encourage.
But when they
debate.
grow up, you want them to.
Then you want them to talk.
So, like, so which
paradigm
is which?
shifts.
Yeah, which is
Yes.
which? And I think, actually, to be honest, I think our parents, our communities, our governments prepare us for the future, but they prepare us in the future. Just, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
They prepare you once you're old enough.
Yes.
But you see, you can't start
Exactly.
there.
Exactly.
You can't start at old enough.
Somebody has said that for this generation, the education system should be preparing them for 20 years to come.
yes.
But we are still seeing things that I went to school and I'm relating.
And you're helping your child
The
the
world
same
has changed.
Yes, yes, and actually someone intimated and said, why don't you have a job center where you can just, the little things they miss while they're doing their degree, they get them, you know, in midway you prepare
Yeah.
them. So you don't send them to me to not give them the right salary because they're educated, yes, but they can't do that job, you know what I mean? So betting on young people. If we're going to talk about national development, Cedric, what are those key things we need to invest in as a country if we are betting on young people?
Thank you, Flavia. Now, the Vision 2040 highlights a number of priorities that this government is ready to invest in, and these are things like agriculture, tourism, minerals, oil and gas infrastructure, and human capital development.
Is this where young people are?
Well, young people are everywhere, but what I wanted to emphasize is that
Are they excelling everywhere? Not so much.
not so much.
so much.
You know, what I wanted to emphasize on in terms of those priorities is the human capital development, and one of the other things that is very important that we normally not take seriously is mentorship, and I think we had this discussion earlier.
Yes.
Dr. Christine here has talked about being a product of mentorship. I am a product of mentorship. You probably are.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is how important it is. And that takes two ways. Either for the older generation to take on young people as their initiative to mentor them, and this is a must. And even for the young people to take the initiative to identify those people who can give them the guidance
Yes.
to move. Now, and what that means is that there must be a deliberate effort by even the government to establish structures of mentorship. When you talk about job centers, this is not just a flashy center, well decorated on Kampala Road, and you know, they must
Absolutely.
You must go
exist.
to Gomba district.
Yes, they
I
must.
know. Not only Kampala students.
Yes. So when you talk about a job center, I don't want our viewers to view it as something that's just established.
A nice place in
A
Kampala.
nice place in Kampala. Let's think about an environment where young people are able to learn from a society where they exist. Now, this particular dialogue, we hope that some of the things that will come out are things that we've talked about. So we can't tell what the panelists or the audience is going to highlight, but the most important bit is that many things are going to come up, and then it will be for the policy makers and the decision makers to say, okay, they picked on that, but that does also stop us as individuals to also speak out and say this came up and I need to, you know,
follow that up as well.
Yeah.
I know we're pressed for time, but Christine, as we're winding up, I know the dialogue is actually today, it'll be live on NTV since we're partners of this. It's generation for generation dialogue. Maybe your parting shots in what such a dialogue would mean for such conversations. It's because, you know, someone says it's not just all talk. If you start talking, somebody listens and eventually implements.
Yes. I think my parting shot is that for those that will be viewing and listening in, is to ask yourself a question. What's my role in this? Number one. Before we go and say, government, help us, the UN help us, whoever out there help us, the question is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
I'm a product of mentorship. And I respect my mentor for what he put in me. And many mentors, but my parents and Dr. Alex Coutinho. I'm who I am at an international level because of his investment in me. And now it's up to me, and I've started on that job of looking out for the people to invest into, the young people to mentor. And I take it as my responsibility. And to the parents, it is our responsibility. Carlos Slim, a Mexican billionaire, has said that most people think, what world can we give? How can we make a better world for our children? But he says it's not about making a better world for our children. It should be, how do we produce better children for our world?
Yes.
So parents,
we can't always be here to make this better world. So if you equip them, they can make this world better for them. So UNFPA, in partnership with NTV, is having this dialogue, Generation for Generation dialogue, which means if you're part of it, you're going to be able to see it live here on NTV. It's here at Serena. Be part of this conversation. Also online, that's Generation for Generation dialogue. If you find UNFPA Uganda, I'm sure you can find the hashtag for today. Thank you so much, Christine and Cedric from UNFPA. That's it for Morning at NTV. Have a good day.
Watching Morning at NTV.
Is a special day with Santa Lucia. Santa Lucia, you've got to taste it.